All right, so I did not yet get a chance to look at the links, so I will do that this week. And the plan with that is that if for some reason I had an issue with the link that you submitted, I'll send you probably an email or something just telling you, hey, try again. And so I don't really want to move forward with that until I've given you feedback. So there's probably on Brightspace, it probably says that there's like a second assignment on that due Friday. I'm going to change that here in a minute after class. So it'll be sometime next week that that'll be due, and I will talk about it on Friday. So today I'm actually going to start covering the book and stuff. So I will try not to make this 40 minutes of hell, but stuff we have to kind of load in this class isn't the most exciting material in the world, but it's something we kind of have to talk about and unpack first, because it's part of the required curriculum. So whenever we are going to try to talk about criminal justice issues in an academic setting, we try to take kind of a data-driven approach. So, in order to do that, we have to have data. We have to have something to look at, something that is as objective as possible, so that we can talk about what the problems are, whether certain things might be solutions to that problem, and then, actually see, run experiments to see if what we think is going to happen is going to happen. So, for example, back in the 70s, they did an experiment in Kansas City, Missouri, about whether or not just random patrol had made any difference in crime rates. And the hypothesis, if you remember from like your science classes or whatever, whenever you're going to run an experiment, you always have to kind of take an educated guess about what you think is going to happen. And it had always been the assumption that cops being out there and just driving around in their off time when they're not otherwise like on a call was contributing to public safety generally, that it was, kind of putting this idea in the criminals' minds that a cop could be anywhere at any time, and then also making the citizens feel safe because once in a while they see a cop drive by or walk by or whatever, like back when they had beat cops and stuff. And so, what's your name? Terry. Okay. What's your last name? Flynn. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I see. And so they did an experiment, to see if that was the case. And what the experiment basically involved was that they split the high crime kind of areas of the city into basically three groups. One was what they call a control group, which is where nothing changed, right? The cops just did what they always did. Another area was one where they saturated and had a lot more officers driving around. And then in the third area, they were only reactive. I mean, you can never, I shouldn't say never, but you should never completely cut off police services, right? Because, people rely on that. It's, sometimes life and death and all that kind of stuff. So if they got a call saying, hey, somebody's, broke into my house or whatever, they would respond to it, but they were instructed not to drive around, not to do any proactive work in that area. And the hypothesis was that in the areas where there was less patrol, that people would notice and they would be more, concerned about crime or whatever. And in the areas where there was more patrol, the citizens would feel safer. And then also that crime rates could be, would be noticeably affected, where the criminals would feel freer, in those high crime areas to commit crime. And so, they were surprised. The result that they expected is not the result that they got. What they got was that basically there was no difference. That just random patrol did not make a noticeable difference in the crime rates or citizens' expectations, largely because for the most part, people don't pay that much attention, to what other people are doing. And, so they didn't necessarily notice. Yeah. Good question. It was, I think it was a period of several months, but I'd have to look it up to know exactly. That's a good question that I've not gotten from anybody before. So I'll have to look that up. But that could have a difference. I mean, and that's what I'm talking about. And that's why we have to unpack this kind of boring stuff first, is exactly that. That direct question right there. How long did they do this for, right? If they only did it for 30 days, well, of course, nobody knows, right? But if they did it for a year, then more interesting. So, how you design experiments and what kind of data that you're looking at in order to determine what constitutes, a difference, right? That is where we're at right now. Is we're talking about the data. So rewind like 100 plus years ago, and if you wanted to do a study, like in the early 1900s, they did studies in like the Chicago area. That was kind of the first area where we started to see this urban crime problem, present itself. And there were a lot of academics in the area that were doing experiments and doing things, but they had a hard time getting data. Like they had to go to police departments and get the reports and compile the data and, put it into, their own things. This was before computers. So, they had to write it all down and put it in, the 19th century version of spreadsheets, and, it was a lot of work and it was a lot of time. And so in the early 1900s, the federal government created what was called the Uniform Crime Report. And that's where the local agencies automatically, like on an annual basis, will submit reports to the FBI in the major crime categories. There's like 7 of them, murder, the things that they're most concerned about. They added arson, I think, in the 70s. It didn't used to be part of it, now it is. And they started collecting this data on the federal level. They did not make this a mandatory thing in terms of departments weren't threatened under penalty of law if they didn't do it, but it was tied to also qualifying to get grants and things like that for equipment and things like that. So it was something. Over time, it got to a point where, we have 90% compliance with it. And the agencies that don't comply with it are generally very small and, so it's not like a significant thing. So we need reliable sources of data is kind of the point that I'm getting at. If we're going to talk about whether violent crime is trending up, trending down, whether, we're talking about a gun control debate or whatever, is gun control in a particular area working or not working? Is it effective or not effective? And that's really hard because there are so many variables to consider, right? Because I see a lot of people on the internet that are wanting to if they're, they're comparing the crime rate in Chicago to Houston. They have a similar population, but there's so many variables that don't involve whether or not each area had gun control or not. That saying, well, crime is worse in Chicago than it is in Houston, therefore gun laws don't work. I don't know. I think if you took all the gun laws away in Chicago, it would still be a pretty bad crime place. And then likewise, if you added a bunch in Houston, I don't think you'd see the crime rate go up. It's not the cause, it's just not necessarily doing as much as people think to control the problem. So and let's see if there's a list. Murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, motor vehicle theft, burglary, and larceny. Those are the major crime categories that they collect data on. They do collect data in other areas. They call those part 2 offenses, but they don't collect as much data on that. And it's something, it's a thing that's published every year, and it's just a very authoritative source on that. Now, because this is something that is voluntary and that comes from police departments, right? All we're getting from the UCR is crimes that are actually reported to the police. Are all crimes reported to the police? It's an easy one. No, it's not. And some crimes have a bigger disparity in that arena than others, right? So murder, when it's known that the murder took place, is almost always reported to the police or known to the police. So that would probably have the highest thing. But we do have this thing that we call the dark figure of crime, and that's where it's a crime that doesn't show up in the UCR. It's not in the official statistics because it wasn't reported. So why might somebody not report a crime? Fear.
They had party.
Right, yeah, fear, maybe fear that they're going to get blamed for it, fear that other people are going to judge them for it or something like that. What's that?
Yeah, that they are not sure about this situation.
Yeah, fear of retaliation, like that the bad guy is gonna like hurt them or their family or something like that. And you see this a lot in the areas that have the highest crime, right? They're afraid of being labeled a snitch. They're afraid of being, if they're part of a gang or whatever, there's very real threat to their life if they turn against them or, and that kind of stuff. And so, it's easy to be brave when you don't have a lot to lose, but when you feel like you have everything to lose, it's really hard to stand up, and be brave like that. So likewise too, there's certain crimes that are more difficult to prove than others, right? So I mean, if somebody smashes the window in your car and grabs cash or whatever out of the car, what's the likelihood that you're going to get that money back or get somebody held accountable for breaking your window? Maybe if there's a camera caught them doing it or something like that, I guess it's possible, but some people would just let that go too, just because it's not worth the time. Rape or what they call date rape and things like that. I mean, that's very intensely personal crime, and if you want to prosecute somebody for a crime, it's a very public affair. I mean, you have to at some point, get in open court and testify about what happened to you and stuff like that. And it's difficult sometimes to prove because it becomes a he said, she said kind of a deal. He says it's consensual. She says that it's not, absent other factors, how do you prove that beyond a reasonable doubt kind of a thing. And so, that's also one of the areas that is significantly underreported. So how do we know that it's underreported? Come on. Yeah. Because we found another way to collect data because somebody thought about this being a problem, right? Somebody considered, hey, wait a minute, there's crimes that aren't reported to the police. How are we going to shine a light on that or try to see the extent to which that's a problem? And so in the 70s, remember, I think the UCR started in the 30s, so 40 years later, they create this National Crime Victimization Survey. And to date, I have not had anybody raise their hand and say that they have filled one of these things out. So I don't know how they pick who they send these things to, but I guess every year the federal government sends out these crime victimization surveys where they ask you, have you had any of these crimes happen to you? And then they, get people to submit the results. And so they've been collecting this data since the 70s. So now it's been like, 50 years or something like that they've been doing it. And what they found, it's hard to read that, but I don't expect you to memorize the numbers anyway, is that, like, for example, they can't survey somebody to ask if they've been murdered, right? So homicide, it's just, that's just, we only know the UCR data. We don't know how many people were murdered that we didn't know were murdered. And it does actually happen, especially when we're talking about, prostitutes, runaways, people like that. If they don't have anybody that notices that they're gone and reports it to the police, it is possible to have murder take place that is not reported to the police. I would say it's a very, very low percentage, very low number, but the victimization survey doesn't cover that, because if it's not known, it's not known. If it were known, it'd be part of the official statistics to get reported. But look at rape. I mean, 130,000 instances in 2015 of rape that were reported to the police, but it's 3 times that number in the victimization survey. So it is a significantly underreported crime. And it's not really hard to think about reasons why that is, but it does kind of, because we're collecting this data now, it does kind of shine a light on that being a problem. And so maybe there's things that we can do that can affect that, right? Like they have a whole lot of advocacy groups that have come about, to support victims of these crimes. And to some extent, has that had an effect on reducing that disparity over time and things like that. So there's all kinds of uses for this data. We'll just put it that way. Same thing like robbery, is not as bad of a disparity as rape, but there's still a lot of them that aren't reported. Burglaries are underreported pretty significantly. And just general theft is pretty significant too. There's not very much disparity with motor vehicle theft. Not very many people notice their car was stolen and don't report it, right? Because it's just such a big item that, it's and yes, arson isn't covered by this victimization survey. So all in all, probably thereabouts 35%-ish of all crimes are reported to the police. So that's really the purpose of talking about this is that when we're going to talk about issues, when we're going to talk about things, like we're not going to get into hyper political debates in this class, like about gun control or about, what to do about certain things. But, if we were, and the people that are, they're often going to cite some of this data. They're going to say, we're going to talk about the, how many people are killed with a firearm every year or whatever. And then if we could, get rid of firearms, then, maybe we could, reduce the total number of people that die. And other people might get on the other side of that and say, well, if you take away one tool to kill somebody, so people are going to just use another tool to kill somebody. And, so you're just, trading one problem for another. Like, in England, they have all these knife attacks, because it's harder to get firearms there. They still have a pretty high violent crime rate in spite of their laws. So, like I said, I'm not trying to advocate one way or another. I'm just saying that this data gets used a lot in criminal justice stuff. And I wouldn't be surprised there at the end, whenever you are doing your final project for your thesis class in this, if you're a criminal justice major, that is. If you're probably gonna cite UCR data in that at some point too. Or you're going to be citing somebody that relied on UCR data in their thing. So it's pretty useful information. And the victimization survey is really, its utility is just kind of to illustrate that UCR doesn't have all of the data. So really all I talk about in chapter 2. Chapter 2 is not. So that kind of brings us around to starting our discussion on theory. Why do people do bad things? Why do people do illegal things? Because is everything that's illegal necessarily a bad thing? And, because like, for example, it's illegal to drive more than 25 miles an hour on College Street. Is that a bad thing? Are you a bad person if you do that, or is it even necessarily super dangerous for you to go 27 miles an hour on College Street or whatever? No. And so we do kind of have kind of a difference between, and we use a lot of Latin when we talk about legal stuff. And so the Latin term would be like mala in se, like that a crime some crimes are evil just by nature, like murder, rape, those things are kind of universally condemned. Not that people can't necessarily find an excuse to justify it, right? But they feel like they have to justify it because the allegation of doing that in and of itself is morally bad. Whereas a lot of crimes are what we call mala prohibitum, which means that they are simply just illegal, for one reason or another. Right? A lot of the traffic laws are that way, drug laws, more and more states now are either already legalized marijuana or are on a path to doing so, including Missouri. We have it legal for medicinal purposes now, but everybody kind of knows that's just a stair step on the way to making it legal, because that particular crime does not enjoy as broad public support as it used to, because what's the harm really, and a lot of the things that they say to justify making or keeping marijuana illegal applies either in the same proportion or even more so to alcohol, and alcohol is not illegal. They tried that in the 20s. We'll talk about that, prohibition later, but we have a lot of regulations, a lot of crimes that are not necessarily evil on their face. They're just a deviance, from whatever public norm is expected there, or they're there just to kind of keep order. Like a lot of the traffic laws are about that, right? We want to try to keep traffic deaths to a minimum, because if we look at the stats, on that, which that wouldn't be the UCR, that would be like Highway Traffic Safety Administration. But if we look, we can find stats on traffic deaths like every year, and they're pretty significant. So they justify the laws, based on not that it's evil to do that, but just that they're trying to kind of keep people safe generally on the roadway. So theory is a big part of the discussion in criminology, because of the fact that we have certain things that we have deemed to be illegal. We have certain things that we deemed to be kind of a public menace kind of a thing. And we want to know what we can do to keep that to a minimum. I mean, are we ever going to arrive at a society where there is no crime? Probably not. But we want to try to keep it to a minimum, and so there are times throughout our history, especially since we've been collecting the data over the last 100 years, that crime, just generally, and crime in specific categories, has either trended upward or trended downward. And people have sought to try to explain that either as policy successes, on the part of the administration, or policy failures on the part of the administration. And so, for example, when they first started collecting the data, it was kind of in that period of time, kind of right before World War II. And so during World War II and afterward, the crime rates went down pretty significantly because a lot of the young men who would otherwise be around maybe to commit crimes were, overseas doing war, and a lot of them died and different things like that. And so we saw the crime rates trend down, and then we saw them start to climb again in the 60s. And we had kind of a turbulent, kind of social time, not unlike what we're facing today, actually, with protests and with civil rights movement and all this other kind of stuff. And it was making the crime rates rise. And what did the politicians do in response to that? They doubled down on trying to, strict enforcement and very severe penalties. And, how effective was that? That's debatable. And that's the thing with theories is, whatever we do in response to crime is really based upon what we think or what we perceive as causing the crime in the first place. So why do people commit crime? There's a million reasons. I'm not looking for one in particular, but just whatever pops into your head, what is it? Why does somebody commit a crime? Yeah. Yeah, it could be desperate. Are they stealing because they think that that's the only way that they can get something? And what are they stealing? Are they stealing food? Are they stealing TVs? Are they stealing whatever? Yeah. I mean, a lot of our moral values are kind of shaped in the households that we grow up in. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's a big one too, and we'll talk a lot about that because how they dealt with crazy people before the late 60s, early 70s. You know how they dealt with crazy people? Yeah. Locked them up and tossed the key. Like they did crazy experiments on crazy people, like in the 70s, or not 70s, in like the 40s and stuff, like during the war years and stuff. They were doing like ice pick lobotomies on people and stuff. Like it was crazy. And and if you don't know, that's where they like take out the frontal lobe of your brain because it kind of makes you into a zombie, really, that controls a lot of your higher order thinking and stuff. And so you just kind of become you're not a troublemaker anymore, but you're also kind of an imbecile, so yeah, I mean, and that's all based on theories, over the years. So we want to know what causes crime, and you talked about some things, and some things maybe that that didn't get brought up, but that you all probably agree. What if you think you can get away with it, right? It's something you're tempted to do, and you think you can get away with it. So I generally drive somewhere between 5 miles and 10 miles an hour over the posted speed limit, depending upon the time of day, depending upon where I am, depending upon a lot of different things. I feel a little freer to do it in Pettis County because I actually have a commission there, with the sheriff's department. But nevertheless, I always feel pretty safe going about 5 over, because it's not worth the time for most cops to mess with less than 10 over, you know? Or if they do stop you, they just stop you. They don't generally give you a ticket unless they're just trying to be officer of the year or something like that. So, you know, that's a theory, right? That's a theory that I think I can get away with it, so I'm going to do it. They call it classical criminology. It's where we're rational people, right? And we think about the consequences of our actions. And if we think that we're going to get caught, if we think that the punishment's going to be severe, you know, and that's the other thing is technically, if I'm ever proved to be wrong with that, you know, idea that I can get away with it, it's a ticket, it'll suck, but I can afford it. You know, I could pay it, you know, and move on with life. Maybe I'd learn a lesson, maybe I wouldn't, but you know, that's kind of the one of the earliest theories that was actually set forth was that classical criminology theory. Prior to that, people thought that that criminals were, you know, evil, you know, or bad, or rotten. Rotten would be a better word, actually, because rotten implies what? It implies that there's nothing you can do about it, right? They're just gone. They're done, you know. And so, what can you do with somebody who's just rotten? Lock them up, throw away the key, or you know, like kill them. And it's really blunt to say it that way, but what did they used to do to criminals? They used to crucify them, they used to hang them, they used to, you know, burn them at the stake. I mean, some of this stuff you hear about in history, and it just shocks the conscience of a modern American, right? To think, because what can we use the death penalty for now? Pretty much nothing. Murder, like not even all murder, just like the most heinous of murders, right? You know, like somebody that's like planned it in advance and you know, because that's the terminology they use is malice aforethought. It means that you didn't just like have an emotional break and snap and kill somebody, like you planned it out. You decided you were going to do that, and you made a plan and you carried it out. And that's the only crime that they can even seek the death penalty on. And even then, you know, oftentimes, you know, it's so difficult to prove that mental state, that pre-planning is difficult to prove. So a lot of times prosecutors will accept a plea bargain. They will let you plead out to second-degree murder, take the death penalty off the table because it spares them having to go to trial and taking the risk that they can't prove that premeditated element, you know, in court. And we'll talk more about that, I think, a little bit more towards the end of the class, because that's another one of those kind of political debates that, you know, we're probably not going to, you know, we're probably not going to all agree, and we're probably not going to all, you know, come to a universal answer on that, because there's solid points on both sides of the issue, really. You know, kind of like gun control, you know, the truth is somewhere in between. So when we're going to build a theory, we want to try to, you know, take a data-driven approach, and we want to try to figure out and acknowledge that there's a lot of different types of theories, and all of them have some validity, right? There is no universal thing. Not everybody commits crime because they're desperate. Not everybody commits crime because they're evil. Not everybody commits crime because they're, you know, thinking through the consequences of their actions. How often do people think through the consequences of their actions? Not as often as you think they do. Why? Because we also have emotion. And when we have emotion, we sometimes do things that are out of character. We sometimes do things that we instantly realize we shouldn't have done, you know? I mean, you know, I have like toddlers, you know, and they are good at pushing buttons. And I've had many times that I have like snapped and yelled at them and realized, like, what am I doing? You know, like I gotta stop, you know, or, you know, in an argument with your spouse or your significant other, you say something and you realize, ooh, shouldn't have said that, you know, right? Like, because you wouldn't, if you were thinking about the consequences of your actions, you would never have said that, but you weren't. You were angry, you were, you know, hurt, you were upset, you were, you know, what, insert emotion here, and and it kind of led you down that thing. So, so when we think about why do people commit crimes, we have to consider that it's not a universal principle, and then we have to kind of discuss a little bit of everything because it's going to be different for different offenders. And so, like I said, the first kind of semblance of a theory that we had was oriented towards, criminals are bad, and so we need to get rid of them. That was it, and it kind of goes towards a discussion we'll have later on when we talk about corrections. What's the goal of punishment, right? For if the cause of the crime is that the person is evil, then what's going to work as a punishment is going to be like either what they call incapacitation or locking them up and throwing away the key, or killing them, getting rid of them, ending their ability to commit future crimes is really the only thing that would work. And obviously I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying that back in the day, that's why punishments were so brutal and so often involved death, for like stealing, like they're up until like the early 1900s, and there was areas of the country where you could be hanged for stealing a horse, it just boggles the mind in America, not like somewhere in the third world country, but like here, and the Salem witch trials, if you read about that in your history class, they were literally burning women to death, to prove whether they were or were not a witch, it's crazy, but it was based upon that idea that they were just bad or evil, they couldn't be fixed, right? And so the classical criminology theory that I brought up and talked about, that was the first time that somebody, brought that rational thought that, hey, maybe these people are doing it because they can get away with it, or because the punishment isn't severe enough. And so the proposal there is that if we could be very fair, firm, and consistent, right, with people, if we could, ensure swift, severe, and certain punishment, that we can affect people's behavior, so, one of the most effective examples of that is who here wants to cheat on their taxes, right? Because what happens to people that cheat on their taxes? The whole weight of the federal government comes down on top of you, and it's an ordeal. It's an ordeal just to be audited, even if you did nothing wrong, right? Much less if you did. And they have, once in a while, they catch a high profile celebrity, Wesley Snipes, who else got in tax trouble? Willie Nelson. Trump hasn't been in tax trouble yet, as far as like criminal, but they were trying to get him. But they once in a while they catch some high profile celebrity, and the whole goal of that is making a public display out of it so that everybody knows, right? That's deterrence. That's classical criminology. That's saying we want to make sure you don't mess with this, because it's not worth it. But like contrast that to 50 plus years of getting tough on drug crimes, right? What did that accomplish? Not a lot, because there's a lot of profit in that. So there's still people willing to take the risk, even with the severe punishment. So we'll unpack that more when we get back, because it's like time to go. So have a good rest of your day.
I can do, make that, so. Or is it like on break space?
Let me think about what days have you been here?
Today.
Today's your first day.
Yeah, my coach emailed you.
Oh, right. You're
Brady,
the coach.
Yeah.
Or not coach, the wrestler, right?
baseball.
Baseball.
I had to get surgery.
Okay. Sorry, there's like three different. There's like
Yeah.
one kid that has COVID, one kid that was like in Israel, and then another. Yeah, you had the injury.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's not a problem. And he did email me, and I've been on the attendance. I've been saying excuse, so they shouldn't drop through.
All right.